After a long negotiation period, hearing Adam Peters, Dan Quinn, and Terry McLaurin all speak today proved that the organization finally has everyone pulling in the same direction. That and more coming up right now on Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Commanders. I am David Harrison, your guy on the ground here covering the Washington Commanders, doing it for WUSA 9 here with you 5 days a week. And you can also find me writing about the Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com. And you can follow me on X at DHarrison82. I want to thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or your first view. To the everydayers, those of you who come through for every single episode, a special thank you goes out to you every episode, but specifically this one. If it's your first time here, welcome to the show. Hopefully you like what you hear and you come back and you join us again real soon. Coming up on today's episode, the practice squad has been formed. Plus, Dan Quinn and Adam Peters shared what it was like to go through the roster cut process. But first, we heard from Terry McLaurin and Adam Peters for the first time since the contract got done. All of that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is sponsored by PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Everybody wins. That's kind of the theme of segment one here of the program. And the single biggest takeaway from hearing everybody speak here on Wednesday is that Terry McLaurin feels genuinely valued. And, you know, whenever we have these types of situations, you always come into it with a little bit of trepidation and you're trying to read the body language, as unfair as that can be at times, because you never fully know exactly what's going through a person's mind. But watching Terry McLaurin talk to us, reading his body language, watching him on the practice field, honestly, it really felt like none of this had ever happened. It really felt like, you know, looking at the practice field, it felt like he hadn't missed a beat doing all those things. Now, full disclosure, we no longer get to watch the full practice like we do during training camp, so a protracted practice, right? Not the full-blown thing, but watching them go through individuals, go through a little bit of work and stuff like that, really you would never be able to tell this guy missed all of training camp this season. Then to hear them talk from a front office perspective, Dan Quinn and Adam Peters shared some stuff with us, but Adam Peters first shared a little anecdote, a little story about being up in the office, and he said, quote, "The cool story, we were in my office, we just heard a huge commotion outside, and it was all the guys congratulating him for that deal," end quote. And that's something that Terry McLaurin also talked about. We actually saw Jayden Daniels. If you didn't see the video, Amazon Prime football, their Prime football broadcast team, they came out, Taylor Rooks interviewing Jayden Daniels and asked him about the Terry McLaurin contract, and Jayden actually even told that same story. So they just got done running. Jayden went in, checked his phone, saw the news. They all saw the news. They all went and found Terry, and just a big hoopla and a big celebration for their teammates to be getting that kind of deal. That's exactly how excited they all are to get Terry McLaurin back on this 3-year contract. Peters also explained the philosophy of rewarding a key player, said, quote, "You really just never lose perspective of what this person means to our locker room, to our team, and to this community," end quote. And I think that's kind of the big thing here. And I've had, been on the radio, I've had fans come talk to me, other media members kind of say, like, look, I'm starting to feel a little bit nervous. And I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to sit here and say, never had a creeping moment, never had a doubt in my mind that the Terry McLaurin situation was going to get resolved. But you always came back to the fact that, look, Terry has said time and time again, this is where he started his career. It's where he wants to end his career. General Manager Adam Peters, from even back in the early part of the offseason when he was first getting asked about Terry McLaurin contract extension, said this was something he wanted to get done. The organization wanted to get it done. DQ, speaking that he's confident they're going to get it done. And then every player, Jayden Daniels, Zach Ertz, Austin Eckler, it doesn't matter who you talk to, what form of interview they're in, a scrum, local, national, doesn't matter. They all said he's going to be here. We want to see him come back here. And you just had to know that those cooler heads were going to prevail and eventually a deal was going to get done. And of course, that's exactly what happened because of how important Terry is, not just to the team, not just to the roster and the offense, but just to the entire DMV area in general. Dan Quinn also talked about Terry McLaurin's return to the field, said, quote, "He's a rare competitor, so he'll be out on the field today with his teammates," end quote. And look, Terry was also asked during the press conference about his ankle injury. A little bit of a smirk on his face as he said, I'm going to keep that between the trainers and me and the front office. And well, he kind of told on himself because he actually said, I'm going to keep that between me and the front office. And he goes, and the trainers. And so, look, business is business. People, we have coach speak out here and things like that, and it's just part of the business, fortunately or unfortunately. But yeah, first day of practice after the deal is signed, Terry McLaurin's out here looking pretty good on that bum, quote unquote, ankle. So not really too concerned about there. In fact, talking to Terry McLaurin, talking about that perspective, he said, quote, I go back into the weight room to lift, and I'm not kidding, like 30 guys were in the weight room giving me an ovation, cheering for me, happy for me, patting me on the back, just loving me up, end quote. And that is exactly the kind of welcome you want. Terry's been here, so it's not a physical welcome as in, hey, welcome to work, finally, and thanks for showing up. Understanding this was the moment they've all been waiting for, not just Terry, understanding that this is where the offense, this is where the team kind of kicks it into overdrive just a little bit, right? Also described the emotional journey, citing feelings of, quote, uncertainty. There was frustration, there was unknown, end quote, but credited his faith and his family, especially his wife, for kind of getting him through those moments. Admitted to himself, there were some moments of optimism. There were also some moments of pessimism. I don't know, being negative. General Manager Adam Peters admitted as much too. Said some days he came in and said, oh man, we're going to get this done real soon. And then some days he came in and didn't have such an upbeat look on it. So I think, the fans had it up and down. The media was up and down. I think it's just part of the stress of going through a situation like this, for all sides. Obviously, some sides are more invested and it really impacts them directly, right? Terry McLaurin and his wife, for example, it certainly impacts them directly a little bit more than it does guys like me. But I think everybody kind of had that little bit of an up and down experience. And then Terry summed up his experience with the negotiation saying, quote, the way it ended was better than the way it started. So that's what it's all about. Everybody wins, in my opinion, end quote. And I think that's a really poignant way of putting it. I think it's a really good way of putting it. Directly addressed the narrative of his age, turning 30, talking about the projections. And, look, he wasn't talking to me directly, I don't believe. Didn't look at me while he was saying this, right? But he did talk about, people got their data, they got their charts, they got their projections and all this stuff. But he said, too, there's also going to be outliers, right? And we've also talked about this on the show, the amount of years he's played compared to some of those other guys, the amount of injuries he's had compared to some of those other guys, surgeries, et cetera. So even when he's playing like at Ohio State, he's only getting 20 reps, a game in some of those games, early on. So just kind of pointing to all those things on why he might be able to be that outlier where maybe his decline doesn't start till, 32 instead of 30 like it does for some other receivers. And certainly, I think there's some value to that as well. And I certainly hope that Terry can prove, me and everybody else who looked at those charts wrong, including apparently Adam Peters, judging by the construct of the contract, which if you don't know the construct of the contract, go back to the last episode on this one. It's a bonus episode. It's about 20 minutes long. We dive deep into the construct of the contract in there. On his plan for getting ready for week one, I asked him directly, DQ's talked about having to protect players from themselves sometimes. I said, how do you go about getting ready for week one without overdoing it and potentially suffering a setback? He said, quote, I'm a vet, so I know what it takes to get my body ready for practicing games. There's a great plan in place for me to continue to ramp up so that there aren't any setbacks, and I trust the plan that's going to be in front of me to help me get there, end quote. The answer was actually much longer than that, a lot better than that, but I'm not going to sit here and read an entire novel because he's Terry McLaurin, and Terry says really good things all the time, but he also says a lot of things a lot of time. So if you didn't see the press conference, I'm probably going to cut it into a short if I can and publish it on YouTube anyway because it was a great answer. Absolutely loved it. From one guy on the roster, as important as he is, to the entire 53-man roster and the experience that goes behind crafting it. That's up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you in part by PrizePicks, the daily fantasy platform that lets you turn your football predictions into real rewards. You knew Terry McLaurin was going to come back ready to dominate, and PrizePicks is the best way to act on predictions just like that one. It's so simple to play. All you got to do is you pick more or you pick less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. It could be 3 players, 4, 5, or 6 player projections. As long as it's 2 or more, you get their stat projections and you pick whether you think they're going to get more than that stat projection or less than that stat projection. I'm already looking at taking more on Jayden Daniels passing yards and more on Terry McLaurin's receiving yards for week one. PrizePicks is even offering max discounts like setting Dak Prescott's line at just half a yard passing for the opener. So if you take the more on half a yard passing for Dak, as long as he passes from 1 or more yards, you're going to win. I love the flex play option. Even if one of my picks misses, you can still win. Plus, the withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. So download the PrizePicks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. With PrizePicks, run your game. While every team is making cuts this time of year, Washington Commanders head coach Dan Quinn admitted he had sleepless nights, showing refreshing and necessary competitiveness that this roster has sorely lacked in some of the years prior. So the team finalized this 53-man roster, which is defined by its culture and its leadership, right? We talked about culture over cost in a previous episode, talking about the deep dive into that 53-man roster, and it was very clear that a lot of these decisions weren't necessarily based on draft status, contract status, all these other things. They're looking for the right people in the right positions. Now, a little bit of caveat to that, Dan Quinn did acknowledge Saturday after the preseason finale against the Baltimore Ravens that when you're a higher draft pick, yes, sometimes that will keep you on the roster just a little bit longer than maybe it would have, say, if you had the same performance as a 6th rounder or a 7th rounder. So I know some people out there a little bit, confused, a little bit turned around about certain players staying on the active roster that feel like maybe hasn't necessarily deserved that spot. And certainly Dan Quinn acknowledging there is a little bit of that. If you're a higher draft pick, say day 1, day 2, you get a little bit more wiggle room, a little bit more time to kind of prove yourself. Like it or not, it's part of the business. I understand it personally, whether I like it or not either. But Dan Quinn, Adam Peters acknowledged the difficulty of the process, saying, quote, yesterday, which as of today is Wednesday, yesterday being Tuesday, the final cut down day, is a difficult process, a tough day for a lot of players and for ourselves, end quote. And, obviously, I think more people are going to feel more sympathetic, empathetic towards the players getting cut and then the players getting cut and not being offered practice squad positions, right? Because this is potentially the end of your lifelong dream and journey of trying to make it to the NFL and do all these other things. But there is a process here, especially for the scouts, the coaches, the GMs, everybody. Like, they pour so much into them, and they want to see that performance and that effort and that growth so much. Like, there is an investment in these guys. It's not a sterilized experience of, oh, well, you're just a number on my list or a name on a sheet, and whether you say or go really doesn't really matter. There is a process to this, and there is emotion invested in this process. So, it's good to kind of see that side of the story. Dan Quinn framed the tough decisions as a positive sign of a healthy roster, however, taking the coach stance, saying, quote, there were some really tough calls, hard, and that's what you want it to be, where it's competitive, where you can't sleep, and where you talk at night and talk in the morning, end quote. Kind of went on about having a roster that you really felt like you're cutting really good people. And I remember I actually had a brief conversation with Dan Quinn earlier in the offseason, and I told him, I said, look, we're not even there yet. This was before training camp even started. And I said, I'm looking at your roster, and there's certain position groups where I'm like, how are you going to cut a certain amount of guys? Who are you going to cut? I looked at the defensive line, and I didn't say this specifically to him, but everydayers, if you've been around since before then, you'll know, like, Cleveland Farrell is a guy that I identified very early in the process. I'm like, just looking at who they brought in, looking at who they have, the youth potential of some of these other players like Javonte Jean-Baptiste and everything they got going on, like Cleveland Farrell is a guy that I can see being a casualty of this whole situation just because he's kind of capped out. We kind of know who he is, and who he is solid in what he does, but where's the dynamic? Where's the explosiveness? Where's the incredible aggression? Just didn't see it there. And, lo and behold, month and a half or so later, Cleveland Farrell is one of the cuts. I also talked about the linebacker room. I was like, man, you got a lot of really good, talented linebackers. Ale Cahill is actually someone that we studied in the pre-draft process. He was a day 3 undrafted free agent type of prospect, but really came away happy with what he was able to do. Actually started off with Carson Schlesinger, linebacker at UCLA, who went much earlier. From him, we went to Cade Medrano. From Cade Medrano, we went to Ale Cahill. So kind of just 3 really good UCLA linebackers that Ken Norton Jr. had his hands on before. And you see they kept a lot of linebackers. Now, not all of them are off-ball linebackers, but some of them outside linebackers like Von Miller, but a lot of linebackers staying on this roster. So you see that difficulty in the team being able to kind of whittle down. And that's exactly what you want when you're building a successful roster out here. Talking about the roster support system, let's go back to Terry McLaurin for a little bit, not just from the roster cut standpoint, but also how the roster supports itself. Terry McLaurin talking about Jayden Daniels saying, quote, him and I have a lot of personal conversations throughout this process. He was an extreme support for me since the first day, end quote. He also added, quote, he never let me forget that my presence is missed out there. He never let me forget that I'm worth everything that I'm asking for, end quote. And that's a great way to support your teammate in private, but also in public, right? Terry said he acknowledged that he knew or was aware of, Jayden Daniels going on ESPN and talking about how valuable Terry is. Zach Ertz going on, Kay Adams, I don't remember exactly what it shows, so don't kill me if I get him wrong, but Zach Ertz going out there and doing a national interview talking about, I hope Terry gets everything he's asking for. Austin Eckler going out there and really backing him up, just his teammates really in every facet and every opportunity, really going out there and supporting him in his quest to satisfy the business side. They all understand there is a business side to this game that they play as professionals, and they all wanted the best for him. I remember I told you guys, I told every day, it's like I didn't out the player, and I'm not going to do it right now either, but before I conducted an interview with the player once, Terry was out here signing autographs, and he kind of said to me, like, man, they need to get this guy's contract done. We need him out here. And I was like, yeah, dude, I hear you. So even, to the local, to the individual, like, really didn't matter. Anytime one of these teammates had an opportunity to back up Terry McLaurin, that is exactly what they were doing, and Terry saw it. Terry greatly appreciated it, especially guys like Bobby Wagner. If you remember going back to that preseason game against the Baltimore Ravens, we talked about it. They spent the entire first half talking, Bobby Wagner and Terry McLaurin, and I told you, it didn't look like it was just, oh, look at that play that just got made. Oh, look at that football play that just happened. No, it looked like a very intense conversation. Not like Bobby was chewing him out or doing anything disrespectful or anything like that, but just looked like a very intentful conversation, one with great purpose. Terry McLaurin said, quote, Bobby really helped me a lot during this process. He just tried to give me all the tools that he could, all the knowledge and wisdom that he could to help me make the best informed decision and be where I'm happy, end quote. And I really like the part where Terry said that Bobby never tried to steer him, never tried to tell him what to do, how to go about it, do whatever Bobby would say to do. But Bobby Wagner is someone that has great experience in this arena. He's his own agent. He's brokered a lot of his own deals, some of his biggest contracts he's brokered. He's bought part of a WNBA franchise, right? So this is a guy, Bobby Wagner, who's been around, and he's been in a lot of deals, and he knows how this side of the business works. So for him to kind of give Terry McLaurin that insight, give him maybe even a little bit of advice, not necessarily telling him what to do, but just giving him some perspective on how to handle things, I think really, really kind of speaks up to the way this locker room is bonded and the way the guys that like Bobby Wagner really kind of influence other guys. Because not for nothing, but Terry McLaurin is in a situation where let's be honest, like this is his last big contract, right? After this, you're probably looking at like 1 year deal, which is where Bobby Wagner is. So to get this one as right as you possibly could, obviously meant a lot to a guy like Terry McLaurin. And you go back to Bobby's comments earlier in training camp about thinking that players need to be smart about the business side, and too many of us, him saying too many of us players are not smart about it, kind of just shows up in that conversation you have with Terry McLaurin, offering him that insight, offering that expertise. So really good stuff there from Bobby Wagner, all the teammates, including some of the young guys. The young guys obviously happy to see Terry McLaurin out here. Practice squad got formed on Wednesday. We're going to dive into that coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you in part by Rougiette. Guys, you have probably heard of Viagra or Cialis, but if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rougiette Ready. We just talked about the confidence in the Commanders roster. When you need to be ready and confident for your moment, there's Rougiette Ready. It's a next-gen prescription treatment that dissolves under your tongue and works fast in about 15 minutes on average, and the effects can last up to 36 hours. The entire process is online. Rougiette connects you with a board-certified doctor and ships your treatment discreetly to your door. So head to rougiette.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rougiette website for full safety information. Today's episode is also brought to you in part by FanDuel. Locked On Commanders brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. After hearing from guys like star receiver Terry McLaurin and seeing the leadership from linebacker Bobby Wagner, I'm more excited for the Commanders season than ever before. FanDuel makes every game even more exciting. I love using it because you can build the same game parlay every day, as you know, same game parlay. That's what I love to do. And you can do it with Jayden Daniels anytime touchdowns. You can do it with the Commanders win, or you can jump in live as the game is going, get the feel for the flow, and make your bets and see if you can't make some quick, easy money. The best way to add energy to Sundays this fall is with FanDuel. And right now, new customers, you bet just $5. And if your first bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to use anywhere on the app. So if you're ready to play, Download the FanDuel app by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Dan Quinn's story about players wanting to return to the practice squad isn't just coach speak. It's the single most tangible evidence that the culture in Ashburn has fundamentally changed for the better. The 14-man practice squad has been formed. At least that's what they've got so far, the 14-man practice squad, reflecting a culture that players absolutely want to be a part of. Dan Quinn, Adam Peters talking to us about that as well. DQ said, quote, to have this many guys want to come back and be a part of the practice squad after Adam and I are sitting in front of them on a tough day, that speaks to their regard for one another and knowing that they want to be a part of it, end quote. He concluded, quote, when a team's connected, you got a chance to do some good things, end quote. And that's exactly what we saw last year. And what really stood out to me last year is we already know the practice squad guys. They share a locker room. They share a practice field. But they also traveled together last year. Like, I was really surprised when I saw the practice squad players traveling with the team early in the season. I was like, oh, is that just like a right now type of thing? And they said, no, that's going to be an every week type of thing. And sure enough, every single week, didn't matter where we were going, when we were going. If the team was there, the practice squad players were there too, because they're part of that roster. Adam Peters said he really looked at this team as a 70-man roster, not just a 53-man roster. And I thought that was a really great way of looking at it. And that is what makes, that's the little things that kind of makes this team and makes players who got cut by this team want to come back, be a part of that practice squad, continue to develop, continue to get better at their skills so that next year they can come back and potentially make the active roster, and they can look no further than their own teammates. You look at running back Chris Rodriguez, who made the active roster his first season in the NFL. He was a draft pick, so a lot of people kind of assumed, okay, well, he's a draft pick, so of course he makes the roster because every GM wants to be able to say, all my draft picks made the roster. But then the next year, first year under Dan Quinn, he doesn't make the cut. He ends up on the practice squad, but he goes back, he works out, he does exactly what the coaches ask him to do, and he comes out here this year, balls out, and he makes the active roster, once again, based on his merit, based off of his effort. That's what you love to see. That's what gives practice squad guys confidence, like, hey, I'm in the right place to develop my skills and do what I need to do. Looking at the practice squad roster, we got a blend of veteran experience and rookie potential. We got veterans like tight end Lawrence Cager, D-tackle Sheldon Day, center Michael Dieter, cornerback Antonio Hamilton Sr., defensive end Jalen Holmes, and wide receiver Chris Moore. You also got rookies like defensive tackle Ricky Barber, wide receiver Ja'Cory Brooks, quarterback Sam Hartman, not a rookie, second year, not quite a full-blown vet, right, but young guy. Wide receiver Jacoby Jones, defensive end TJ Magura-Nyanga, who's the international pathway player, safety Rob McDaniel, guard Timothy McKay, and cornerback Carlin Vigor. So again, not all rookies, but younger experienced guys, lesser experienced guys. I know there's some question about Michael Dieter. Some questions about the backup center position just in general. I think, guys, right now, this is probably the way I kind of projected, quote unquote, is obviously Tyler Biadasz is your starting center. I think right now Nick Allegretti is your starting right guard, and Andrew Wiley is your starting right tackle, rotating in and out with Josh Connolly Jr. If worst case scenario happens, let's say Tyler Biadasz gets injured, has to miss a drive, has to miss a game, whatever it is, Nick Allegretti moves over to your center, and then Andrew Wiley moves over to right guard. Josh Connolly Jr. is your full-time right tackle at that point. So I think that's your backup center situation for the roster. Sam Hartman, there were some questions about Sam Hartman. Yes, he is like Jayden Daniels' best buddy on the team as far as friendship goes. He's Bobby Wagner's little brother, all that stuff. Certainly that could have a part to do with it. Look, morale is an important thing. And if you can afford a practice squad spot for a guy that's going to make your quarterback incredibly happy, be a great part of the room, look, there is some value to that. However, I also believe there has to be at least a little bit of confidence in, look, we can still get some stuff out of Sam. We can continue to develop him and potentially, get better play out of him in the future. Because if there's no hope for the performance and the player, then, I don't think that, even being friends with the quarterback isn't enough to trump. I know what kind of nepotism that is, but, that would be kind of that form of nepotism, right? So I don't think that's necessarily all that it is there. Terry McLaurin also talking about some of the young players, saying, quote, one of the most important things to me, not just now, but over the course of my football career, is what are people going to say of Terry McLaurin, the teammate, end quote. Being out here talking about guys like Jacoby Jones, Ja'Cory Brooks, also young guys like Jalen Lane, who's on the active roster, and how he's looking forward to helping them get all this whole thing ready. So throughout this entire episode, we talked about the roster, we talked about Adam Peters, Terry McLaurin, Dan Quinn, all three segments. What does that show you? Synergy. What did we see out here in Ashburn on Wednesday? Synergy. And it's a beautiful thing. The final storm cloud over Ashburn, Virginia has departed. We got beautiful skies on our way, taxiing down the runway to take off in week one. That's going to do it for today's episode. Next time, we are going to come back to you from Ashburn. We got practice again on Thursday, so we'll come back here have more news and notes, and then we'll hit the weekend. And guys, next week, it's week 1 of the NFL season, so you're almost there. Hang in with me. I appreciate you coming through. That's going to do it for today's episode. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, text them directly by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Become an insider today. NFL fantasy draft season is here, so for your second listen, check out the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Check that out on YouTube or wherever you're getting this podcast. To the everydayers, I see you every day. I appreciate you every day. A special thank you goes out to you, especially today. Until next time, stay safe, be kind to one another, and we'll talk again real soon right here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.